Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. So glad to welcome you as part of our community tonight. Please note that this webinar is being recorded and distributed live stream. By entering this virtual meeting room, you give your consent to be recorded and distributed by Vienna Live with Simeon Morrow and other third parties. If you prefer not to be recorded and distributed live stream, please go to the LinkedIn Live video feed, the link to which I've just placed in the chat room. Tonight, our featured guest is Henry Walters, a poet and author of The Nature Thief, which was published in 2022. Welcome, Henry.
Thank you.
Henry, so tell us a little bit about where you come from and how you became interested in translation.
I'm a writer, particularly a poet, and in a way, translation's always been part of my studious life. As a student of Latin and Greek, translation was the way into the languages from the very beginning, translating very simple sentences, trying to squeeze some sense out of what is at the beginning gobbledygook. But in the longer my time with those languages and with other languages has the longer that relationship has lasted, the more translation itself has seemed to be a touchstone, something to return to as an art in itself. Once you start going down the rabbit hole of talking about translation as a practice, it seems to be a very it's talked about in a very mournful minor key, as though you're doomed to failure from the get-go. That all you can hope for at best is a reasonable approximation of the sense of the thing you are trying to translate, and that you are in the process probably going to betray the author and the text that you're working on. And my experience is quite different than one of betrayal. My experience with trying to wrestle with the text and turn it into another language, turn it into another form, is usually one of delight, even if it doesn't, even if in the end I can see its faults and its failings. I mean, in English, the word most associated with translation is lost in translation, something figuratively having dropped out. The Italians have a nice phrase, traduttore, traditore, meaning translator, betrayer. And some of that cloud hangs over the very work of translation. I know a number of people who would refuse to read poems, even novels in translation, feeling like I'm assuming that it's having to wrestle with the mind of, with even one author's mind is enough. Wrestling with two or more at a time starts to sound like a game of telephone. I can understand that instinct. But I wanted to present a couple versions of translation in the next few minutes, partly to offer a sense of what the practice of translation might be, or what value it might have over and above simply making one text accessible to someone from another language.
Okay, and Henry, tell us now, what exactly is translation? When I hear of translation, I'm thinking of originally, as you said, the classics, so Hebrew and Greek, the Bible, the Torah, the Tanakh, the Old Testament, the New Testament, the Gospels. So they were translated from Hebrew and Greek into Latin and into English, into the St. James Bible, for example, into the Lutheran Bible, into German, and to the vernaculars. So tell us about this study that you undertook, I believe, even at a distinguished place like Harvard. Tell us about what that means, translation, for those of us who have never been outside of a place like New London, New Hampshire, which has 3,000 people.
I'd like to toss it open to all kinds of translation, not only sacred texts or hallowed texts that we're trying to get closer and closer to, but kinds of translation that we might not even recognize as translation per se, moving from one person's experience to another experience, even within the same language, is in a way a kind of translation. That word itself is Latin and comes from transfero to carry something across. And just in that etymology, you have a sense if you're carrying something across, you are carrying it across something. You're a river, a divide, an edge, a border, a limit. Um, and so translators are sort of people at those edges, oftentimes invisible ones, trying to make themselves invisible enough that something of the original can survive the passage from one side of the river Styx to the other. Definitely um, the Greek god overseeing these operations is Hermes, who also bears souls from the realm of the living to the realm of the dead, also a god of tricksters, merchants, sleight of hand men, and translators are all of those things. Um, but yeah, my hope is that um, in these couple of examples, we can see translators doing work not out of um, not for the purpose of subterfuge, but out of love.
Okay, and we're going to look in one moment at something. We had an argument before we went on air about translation versus transcription. We're about to argue about, or take a look at, shall I say, then the transcription of Johannes Brahms of a piece by J.S. Johann Sebastian Bach for violin. Johannes Brahms, you're going to tell us, transcribed it. So originally, as you said, if we look at it, transcription as a part of translation, it's where you had even these, uh, forefathers of the Jewish faith, of the church. They were writing down their thoughts in a coded language in order to get it, as you say, across the river Styx, to get it so that it's going from one hand to someone else, as imperfect as that may be. Tell us now then about this chaconne we're about to hear performed by none other than Yehudi Menuhin.
This is a piece many have fallen in love with, myself included. It's a piece, a movement of a partita for the violin alone, and it's a when you hear it, it seems as if the composer Bach was trying to put an organ piece into the mouth of a violin, and so this isn't what we normally think of when we are talking about translation. Usually, the world of translation is the world of words and not of music. But in a way, this already Bach himself seems to be trying to translate something from one sphere of music and carry it over to another, that of the solo violin. And you'll hear just a little bit of it here.
Okay, this is Henry's favorite, or shall I say, the part that he would be most interested in translating. So it's in the middle of this huge composition. So again, Bach is famous for writing, this is a part of a partita for violin. So there's several different movements. This is called the chaconne movement, and it turns out to be larger than the rest of the partita altogether in just one movement. As you see there, it's about 14 minutes. We're somewhat into it, and here is again the part of the chaconne that is most interesting translation to Henry and played by Yehudi Menuhin.
Don't think we can hear Simeon.
Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you for pointing that out to me. So did I not share that? You should be able to, you should be able to hear this.
I'm not hearing anything.
I'm so sorry. So apparently we're not able to hear this.
I hear it.
Yep.
It's good.
Okay, so we can't hear this. We'll continue for a little while for those who can hear it. Okay. So Henry, tell us about this. So tell us about now Johannes Brahms and his love affair for this music.
Yeah. I'm seized with the translator's fury to get closer to it, not having been able to hear that clip, but I've tried to hear it in my mind's ear. Um, one person who was seized with love of this piece was the composer Brahms, and he wrote at one point to a friend, "On one stave for a small instrument, the man, meaning Bach, writes a whole world of the deepest thoughts and most powerful feelings. If I imagine that I could have created, even conceived the piece, I am quite certain that the excess of excitement and earth-shattering experience would have driven me out of my mind." Um, Not only does he say that, but there's a story that he was so taken with this piece that when he invited over a friend of his who was a violinist, this friend would come periodically, and before allowing his friend to take off his coat and hat, he would demand that the friend play the chaconne for him. It's that sort of fury for the piece that caused him eventually to try to transcribe the violin piece onto the piano, and an instrument where Brahms himself was a virtuoso. But when he transcribes it for the piano, something interesting happens. When you take a piece that seems to be a duet or a trio smushed down onto a single instrument, and then expand it back onto the piano, where you have two hands, many fingers, each of which is capable of carrying a voice. Um, all of a sudden, you're seized with a dilemma that the piano is always using more than one voice, or almost always trying to have two voices going at the same time. Um, and here you're trying to render a piece that in a way is only playable on the violin. As a result, Brahms decides to make his transcription for the left hand alone. And when I saw this piece performed, I was struck almost by the drama of it. Watching a pianist who has was trained all her life to use two hands together, having to lay aside her right hand altogether and play what you can see is a difficult enough piece for two hands with only one. Um, the translation or the transcription gets richer when you realize that um, this piece of Bach's was written just after the death of his wife in 1720. And as you hear this attempted duet being played out by one voice alone, um, you realize that the mournfulness and the minor keyness of the piece itself is prompted by um, is prompted by the depth of grief. It's something I feel in listening to it. Something I feel in listening to the Brahms transcription as well, especially because the pianist must sort of widow himself or herself by laying aside the right hand, usually the stronger of the two hands, in order to um, render these multiple voices.
And I'd like to point out, so we are looking here at the Johannes Brahms transcription for the left hand alone for the piano. As you can see, there's a lot going on there. That is a busy left hand. I'd also like to point out that this is the original Bach manuscript. And as Henry was saying, you've got a lot of different voices, and we even see here Johann Sebastian Bach writing, notating each one of the notes as a different voice. So as if you've got four independent voices there. He went out of his way to write that, and then if we take a look again at the manuscript of Brahms, excuse me, the first edition of the publication, Brahms is already, he has to follow what the publisher says. And the publisher wants to do what's easiest to do. So you have everything looks as if it's coming just from one voice, more or less there. So already we have a betrayal. Fantastic. Tell us now.
One,
Yes.
if I might just add, one performer of this piece who's also written about it is Hilary Hahn, who said about playing it that it's solo, yet you don't feel alone on stage because you have all these different voices that are interweaving. You don't feel exposed. You feel like you're part of some larger performance experience that's going on. And I guess I bring this up as an example of translation because in the best translations, I think you do feel that a larger performance experience is going on, that you are, in some sense, channeling or um, translating a predecessor, making something that was not alive alive again or live again. And that may be as a musician, it may be as a poet, it may be simply as a reader. That all of those that feeling of a larger performance experience, that feeling of many voices being condensed onto a single instrument, is possible and accessible to us.
So, Henry, let's go on to our next selection, which is a poem by De Filippo, a Neapolitan poet, and we're going to talk about your translation of this. We're about to hear the poet himself speaking out the original Neapolitan. Tell us why you'd like us to hear him saying this in a language that we won't understand.
Um, the translator's first obedience is to that which he doesn't understand. So to be in the music of it just for a moment before the sense precipitates upward or outward is always good practice. But if this poem itself is a bit of a mournful minor key, throwing up of one's hands in despair, both at love and at speaking one's love. And I think you hear that even without knowing what the words say, you'll hear it in his voice.
Okay, here we are. And the title of the poem?
Rito sapesse dicere. And this is in Neapolitan, so a dialect very closely related to Italian, but quite distinct.
Se tu sapessi dicere, si potesse dicere quello che il cuore dice quando si arrie felice, se tu sapessi di. E si potesse sentire quello che il cuore sente, dicesse eternamente voglio restare con te. Ma il cuore sa scrivere, il cuore è analfabeta, è come un poeta che non sa cantare, si imbroglia, sposta e virgole, un punto ammirativo. Mette un congiuntivo a dove non c'ha da sta e tu che lo stai a sentire ti imbrogli appresso a isso come succede spesso e addio felicità.
Okay, tell us about all that we're about to translate.
Is it easy to put the text up for us here?
Here it comes.
Great. So in a way, this is a twice translated poem. I know no Neapolitan. I can get by in Italian, so I'm reliant on an Italian translation of the original. All three of these appear side by side here, with the Neapolitan or the Napolitano on the left, the Italian in the center, and my English on the right. I'll read the English here to get us inside the poem. Oh, if I could say. Oh, if I could say what the heart says, how happy I'd be to say it to you. And if I could hear what the heart hears, you'd say, ever and always let me stay with you. But what's the heart know? It's dumb to alphabets. It's like a poet too dumb to sing. Gets confused, apostrophes, exclamation points, puts could and would where they don't belong. And you stand there listening, confused just being near him, as always happens. And happiness, so long. Um, This is one in a very long tradition of disappointed love poems, almost self-defeating love poems, where just by "Oh, if I could say" of the very first line, we're already in a mode, um, literally in Italian, in a different mood, a subjunctive mood. If I could say, that's contrary to fact. I can't say. We already know from the beginning that the poet is writing off the ability to say. Um, and yet you're still tempted by this possible road that you can go down, at least in imagination, that maybe once the poet could actually translate, in some sense, literally what the heart would want to say. Um, the um, the poem begins to make me chuckle a little bit, as the poet, unable to say what the heart says, or what the heart hears, begins to slander the heart and says, "But what's the heart know? Um, Il cuore è analfabeta. It's without alphabets. Um, Literally, it's illiterate. It's like a poet too dumb to sing." At this point, you wonder, wait a second, is the poet I'm listening to right now, Eduardo de Filippo, is he talking about himself? Is he himself too dumb to sing? Um, is this a song, in other words, or a poem? Is it a poem that wishes to be a song? Um, we're we're all of a sudden with a narrator who we don't really know how far we can trust him, especially because he himself seems to be um, um, down on his own abilities. He gets confused, apostrophes, exclamation points, puts could and would where they don't belong. And you go back up to the top of the poem and you see, oh, if I could say, and you realize he's been sort of planting these seeds um, of his own disappointment, from the very beginning of the poem. In a way, it's a very tightly constructed thing. Um, I um, I bring it up, partly to point out a couple places where a translator, as any literary translator, always feels um, disappointment at what the poem becomes in English, but also delight at some um, treasure sort of laid in his lap, that was not due to the translator's skill, but almost just to the richness of the language. Um, One of those places is the word dumb, which in a way is a harsh word. It's not in the original. The original does not say the heart is dumb, either in the sense of deaf, or I'm sorry, unable to speak, nor in the sense of dumb in the colloquial sense of stupid. Um, but there's something in that word, unable to hear, which is actually related to the word. The word dumb and deaf actually come from the same root. It's a root that goes back to meaning smoke filling the air, fumo in Italian, but also in Latin. To fume is from the same root. So a mind filling with dust or with smoke, a mind that's confused, the very mind that De Filippo says, "Sembrolia." It gets confused, and you standing there next to him get confused just by his presence there. That confusion is in that root of the word dumb that we need here to signify three things, both not being able to speak, being mentally incapable, and being in a larger metaphysical way confused. Um,
Wow.
the other gift is in that word apostrophe. In Italian, it simply means the virgule of the second to last stanza is simply the punctuation mark, the apostrophe. It means a little rod in Italian. But in English, it has another sense. Apostrophe is a Greek word that also means a direct address to someone. And here there's the possibility in the English version that the poet has not only confused punctuation marks, but has actually confused who he is addressing. Gets confused, apostrophes, meaning have I picked the wrong you, the wrong beloved? Am I addressing the heart instead? My own heart, my own self. Those suggestions are also in themselves sort of subjunctive paths that the poet can go down, that the reader can go down, possible meanings that may bear fruit that are only accessible in English, even as other things fall out. One thing that falls out, obviously, is the last line. Um, After I get confused and you, my beloved, get confused, he says, "Come succede spesso, e addio felicità," as always happens, and goodbye happiness. Um, the Italian for goodbye is addio, literally to God, as you might say, go with God, go with God's protection, addio. Um, in English, of course, we don't have that phrase, um, and I can't render it in any way that's convincingly speakable. Um, in Italian, there's this sense that not only is he saying goodbye to happiness, but also happiness is with God. Happiness is something that God can know and that humans cannot. And I hear in the recording of his saying it almost a satisfaction, a strange satisfaction that um, um, not only am I not going to be happy as a poet or as the speaker of this poem or as a lover, but I may not want to be happy, at least not in that capital F felicita with which the poem ends. That maybe that's best left to divinities.
Okay, so we have
Um,
here a poem about a man not knowing how to express himself, and then we have his translator trying to get the job done. So this brings us to our philosophical portion of the conversation that I know everyone look forward to every week, and the title is Translations. Do they guide the reader or misguide the reader? Henry, you have surely ordered pizza both in Naples and in Boston. As each caters to the taste of a specific public reality, a Neapolitan pizza wouldn't really satisfy the expectations of a Bostonian and vice versa. For that reason, the New England pizza reaches for pizza authenticity by invoking the spirit of Italy and then offers something quite locally digestible inside the box. I'd like us to take a look at what that looks like. Here it is. There it is. Fresh pizza, oven baked. At the bottom, you have in industrially printed cursive, traditional Italian, contemporary taste. Is this, Henry, a betrayal of pizza, an extension of pizza, or something altogether different?
um, I can't weigh in on pizza more than to say that my only pizza in Napoli was so hot and I was so hungry that I burned all the taste buds off my tongue and am therefore not able to render a verdict. Um, my I guess my wish for translators and readers of translations is to get out of this bind in which we place ourselves of talking about the success or failure of a translation or of a part of a translation, and to really begin talking about it in aesthetic terms. So whether a translation is beautiful or memorable, whether it surprises us. Those terms are much more useful, just as they're useful in appraising what we call an original work of art. And once we see that they should be treated sort of on the same level as works in their own right, then maybe we can also see that those works that we call original are themselves products of a tradition, that the words they use are words that the authors have inherited, that are not, they don't belong to the authors themselves, but to a whole language, to a people, to a history, without without an acknowledgement that even those poems and texts that we hold sacred are themselves translations of their predecessors. We don't see those very clearly either. So when it comes to pizza, I will I'll make a pizza, but I'm not going to claim that it's my invention, um, nor that my pizza holds a candle to my mother's.
So it's a discussion, in other words, that we need to keep going. It's not that anyone has the truth, that we are all part of this and you'd like that we keep it going rather than saying, well, we've got the definitive answer. Okay. Let's see how we can get Henry's book, The Nature Thief. It's at waywiserpress.com. And it's for £10, 99 cents. You'll have to translate that into US dollars if you live in the US. And so I'm going to put that in the chat box. Thank you so very much to Henry Walters. So let's see, before we go, about upcoming events at Vienna Live. We're going to be off for 2 weeks. We begin again on January 9th. In the meantime, if you like to follow Vienna Live, please come to simeonmoro.com and put in your email, and you will get a Friday update with my exclusive insights into what's happening. Again, all information about upcoming shows can be found at www.simeonmoro.com. Thank you so very much to Henry Walters. Thank you to Vienna Live sponsors Victoria and Frederick Mulligan. Thank you also to Abby Moser, Agnieszka Bernardi-Vole, and Mary Schlesinger for their support of this show. Thanks to my cousin Mike, a marketer from Layer App. If you're an architect or an engineer, they have a really cool tool you should check out. Thanks most of all to you, our participants, who make it all worthwhile. From New London and Peterborough, New Hampshire, goodbye, and see you on January 9th.